Hello and welcome to H674, and we are presently at the greenhouse in Kumla. Kumla is famous in Sweden to have the biggest prison in the whole of Scandinavia, but they also have a very beautiful greenhouse. And outside the greenhouse we have this beautiful little pond, and we are going to make the recording inside the orangery. Delicious place to do that. I'll continue a little bit with Ashish Dalela. He seemed to be on the same project at Wittgenstein. He has pinpointers to show us like the fly out of a bottle, and it's really food for thoughts. Things one hasn't considered before. And I really like this little booklet. It's small, surprisingly small I'd say. It's 60-70 pages, but the ideas in there are quite astonishing. And he looked at the mind-body dualism from a Vedic perspective, but also add quite a lot himself. He has an example here, and that is the common acknowledged fact that serotonin is happiness. It's one of the hormones that our body produces, and it's supposed to make us happy. But there is still a linguistic divide, he points out, because serotonin is not happiness. There is a problem here lurking around the corner. And this is not much spoken about, because usually if you open a newspaper, you hear some doctor talking, there is an equal mark between serotonin and happiness. I seem to think it's exactly the same thing. And that causes a lot of problems, because one of the most prescribed drugs today is serotonin uptake suppressor. I don't know the acronym, but they call it SSRI, something like that. Something that you, John, if you listen to this, know much better than I do. And what they do is they hinder the uptake of serotonin, and thereby giving the patient more serotonin and supposedly happy. But it doesn't solve the problem of perception, although a great majority of the population here in Sweden thinks that. It rather leads to a different problem. If the mind is different from the body to begin with, how then can the mind be reduced to the body? There is a divide here somewhere. And conversely, we can change the subject. If the mind is actually the body, then why would we describe the body any different than the qualities in the mind? Why is there a linguistic divide? The latter position entails that all physical properties in current science must be replaced by perceptual properties. For instance, material objects must be described not in terms of length, mass, energy, momentum, temperature, etc., but rather in terms of color, taste, smell, sound, and touch. When mind is reduced to the body, either the physical properties must explain the perceptions, or the physical properties must be replaced by perceptual qualities. Science is unable to find any mechanism by which the former can be achieved. And trying to attempt the latter entails a fresh beginning in science, discarding all established theories of nature. Would we now prefer to dissolve the mind-body divide, or rather live with the divide between the two? That's the question. So let's have a look-see in his solution. I just pinpointed to the problem, and it remains until this day unsolved by most philosophers, even if Wittgenstein had a go at it. I'm still waiting to understand the whole scope of philosophical investigations. It's coming, but how is it in Vedic philosophy? Well, the name of the book is The Apple Really Red? The question is, in Vedic philosophy, is the apple red? Well, it's not red in the ordinary way we sense it. To understand this viewpoint, consider the relationship between words and meanings. The word red is also red, but not in the sense of the color of redness. The word red represents the idea of red as a physical vibration, and the meaning of red is the sensation or concept of redness. In the same way, the Vedas, which is the scriptures of the Vedic philosophical tradition, state that the external world is sound vibrations, which denote the meanings that we can apprehend. These sounds are produced by objectifying, that is, turning into objects the meanings in the mind. And they are perceived as sensations by converting the sounds into meaning. The external world is therefore red, as the Vedic name vak, or sound. Literally, vak means speech. While the internal world is red as manas, or meaning in the mind. Manas and vak are connected by prana, which converts meanings into sounds and sounds into meanings. Prana is said to exist within the nervous system, in the body, which carries signals from the physical world and converts them into ideas in the mind. Similarly, prana converts mental ideas into material objects. There is hence a material world that is objective, but these objects are not meaningless. Rather, all objects are symbols of meaning because they originated as ideas and are objectified into things by the prana. Prana is also the agency that causes us to breathe and a host of other neurological and biological functions. Vedic philosophy describes that when you speak, prana is used to convert the mental idea into speech. Similarly, when you hear or perceive the prana in the sense organs will then carry the information into the mind, whereupon it's perceived as a sensation. The idea that prana connects mind and body is widely used as the basis of yoga and meditation. And when a person dies, the prana is said to leave the body and detach the mind from that body. And now we're going to bring this into scientific context. This is the special mission of Ashish Dalela. He is at his foundation engineer, computer engineer I take it, and he's very clever when it comes to understanding Western technology and also our thinking. So let's move on into the scientific context. Here we can think of the external world as vibrations, as modern science already does, quantum physics. For instance, in atomic theory, nature is treated as quantized waves. However, unlike science, where these waves are studied as phase, amplitude, and frequency, Vedic philosophy treats them as phonemes that represents meanings. These phonemes denote objective information, but the information is semantic rather than physical. In the specific sense, for instance, there can be a sound vibration that denotes the idea of redness. This sound encodes the meaning red, and therefore the material reality is red, but it is not the sensation of red, and therefore the material reality is red. No, sorry, this sound encodes the meaning red, and therefore the material reality is red, but it's not the sensation of red or the quality perception of redness. Now we understand the dilemma with the serotonin and happiness. Therefore, if you believe that the apple is red, you are right, because the apple is the objective encoding of information about redness. But that does not mean that the apple exists exactly as we perceive it sensually. The apple's redness is the information about redness that exists as a sound vibration, similar to the word red. The senses gather this information about redness and convert it into the sensation of redness. Reality and perception are therefore both red, but they exist as two different kinds of red: the word red and the meaning red. The body and mind are therefore mutually connected as words and meanings. This very approach to the description of nature alters the understanding of the mind-body problem, because it changes the nature of the body. The body is now a symbol in the mind. It objectifies the idea that exists in the mind. Through such objectification, the mind becomes communicable. The mind and body are not to be described using two different languages: qualities and quantities, because matter can be representation of ideas. Matter and mind can be described by the same words, although these words denote different meanings in the case of the mind and the body. In the mind, the word is the perception of an idea, and in the body, the word is the objectification of that idea as a symbol. We would now not describe the world as a phase, frequency, or an amplitude. We would instead describe it as phonemes. What is the difference between a phoneme and a phase? Amplitude and frequency. The difference is that a phoneme is a type, while phase, amplitude and frequencies are quantities. So you can say that phoneme is bearer of quality and quantity, if I get this right. Just as you can write the letter A in different fonts, in different sizes and in different colors. In the same way, you can also express the phoneme by using different physical vibrations, but they will still be the same phoneme. Likewise, the small letter I, the capital letter I, and the numeral 1 all look similar, but they are 3 different types. The difference of types denoted by these symbols entail that physical similarity is not semantic similarity. Indeed, in different contexts, the symbol I could denote the English word representing the self, or the first numeral in the sequence of natural numbers, 1. The meaning in the symbol is sometimes due to its form, and this is when we say that the sound represents meaning. The meaning may also be obtained by the relation between symbols, which is when it becomes contextual. However, to even derive contextual meanings, there must already be some meaning in the object natively. For instance, you can call a block of wood as a chair, and the chairness is contextual meaning. But even prior this contextual meaning, there was a possessed meaning, which we call a block of wood. So the contextual and possessed meanings are different and complementary, but the contextual meaning requires some possessed meaning, though not vice versa. Again, we can use language as an example. To a very large extent, the meaning of sentences has a possessed meaning, although sometimes the same sentence can produce an alternative interpretation. If that interpretation wasn't given, the sentence still has a native meaning from the beginning. Now when we start speaking about meanings, we quickly realize that we are attributing them to macroscopic objects, such as tables and chairs. In classical physics, which describe the world as point particles that had no form, neither space, I might add, we could claim that matter has no form and hence no meaning. But macroscopic objects obviously have forms. And these forms, e.g., the shape of something, are associated with meanings such as tables and chairs. This fact leads to new problems in science. The problem is that the collection of particles has additional properties, which cannot be understood in terms of the properties of the individual particle. It's the problem with reductionism. It is thus sometimes colloquially said that a whole is not reducible to parts, because the reduction leads to a loss of meaning. Present science studies the properties of individual objects, which result in problems of incompleteness when science has to deal with object collections. That's where the problem starts. These problems can be resolved if matter was described as symbols of meanings, rather than physical things. For instance, problems in understanding atomic theory can be understood if the collection is seen as representing meanings rather than just physical properties. This is actually what Niels Bohr said. This problem is dealt with at length in my book Quantum Meaning, Ashish book, which interprets the incompleteness of quantum theory as arising out of the fact that matter is not just physical properties, but also a symbol of meaning. In other words, meanings are not just interpretation of the physical world created by the mind. Meanings also have an objective existence outside the mind. However, we must be musically savvy, artistically inclined, linguistically literate to read the meaning. This literacy already exists in our senses, which can read objective meaning in matter, transform it into sensations, because there is a natural language in which meanings are encoded and decoded. We can also invent symbolic languages beyond the natural languages. A new view of matter is needed to explain the world as symbols of meanings, rather than merely the physical properties of the symbols. The physical view, which postulates independent objects, works in some cases approximately, but fails in atomic theory, where the particles are mutually entangled as if they weren't independent anymore, but rather parts of the whole. Reductionism fails in atomic theory, and we claim that the world is no longer separable. This separability has been the cornerstone of classical physics, and it's this very thing that makes atomic theory problematic. The resurrection out of this problem is to say that both atomic particles as well as macroscopic objects are symbol of meaning. The macroscopic world is therefore not classical. It is rather the whole which must be treated semantically. Just the parts must be seen semantically. The classical physical view of nature, in which matter is only physical properties, fails to account for the entanglement of object collections. So what Ashish is proposing is nothing less than a complete linguistic theory of nature. And he doesn't mean this in a Noam Chomskyan way. What he means that language is real. It has real effects, and it's in part the same as the world. And he tries to show this by using the word meaning. And the meaning is transported by prana. And I started to understand here, for some mad reason, I don't know why I came up with Wittgenstein. He's not mentioned in Ashish Dalela's book. As far as I know, he hasn't read Wittgenstein. But what he takes up here is an aspect of Wittgenstein in his philosophical investigations that he intended He understood intuitively, implicitly, but he didn't provide us with any didactic tool. And that was the temporal aspect of his theory. Yes, you could read philosophical investigations still, and still come to the understanding that Wittgenstein wanted you to have. But it would be incredibly difficult. And I've seen people fail at this. One of my favorite professors before was the past Professor von Wright. And he was a close associate of Wittgenstein. But part of the things he did never ever understand with philosophical investigations, the Blue Book, the Brown Book, the later Wittgenstein, has to do with the complexity of understanding when Wittgenstein says that words are the world. He means that both from a spatial and a temporal viewpoint. Causality is not outside his project. Well, he writes in the introduction, nothing is outside the language game. But I need to get my head around that as a reader of the book, and von Wright didn't manage. I could see he didn't manage, but I didn't know why he didn't succeed. It started to dawn on me that it needs a temporal aspect to be understood. I don't have the audacity here to say that philosophical investigation is incomplete in some way, but when it comes to the didactical tool, it needs to be there, I'd say, for most of us mortals. And to understand it without that tool, maybe if you're a super genius, but it's almost to the point you have to redo what Wittgenstein did. It's not very easy. Closing to the impossible. We need that ladder, and Wittgenstein is naming ladder, but I obviously start thinking of physical spatial properties when he says the world is words, and objects and words are the same thing. He means that the whole is, of course, causal, because that's contained in the words in his explanation. It's already there. But we misses that. He's not going to our level. He needs to be a bit more thinking, where are we? Well, isn't that typical of Wittgenstein? He did the same when he was a school teacher. He tried to teach school children in Austria first class logic, and there were only like 11 or 12. When they didn't understand, they got to taste the stick. And we would witness later on, like 10 years later, these children, the majority was still traumatized 10 to 15 years later. And now we're talking Austria in the mid-wars area, the 20s and the 30s. I can imagine the teachers at that time weren't very lenient on the children, especially not in Austrian schools. But Wittgenstein stuck out. Well, thank you, Ashish, for opening up my eyes for this thing in Wittgenstein. I think I'll have to do another lecture to explain what I just realized. But I will terminate here. Maybe a little view of the fig tree here that actually has a little fruit coming on here. And I say thank you.
Thank you.